Valentinian III, sitting on his throne, speaks to Romulus, "We entrust you with a very important mission, to settle with Attila, affair of the vases of Sirmium, and to avoid the war." The Count trembles at this news and exclaimed involuntarily, "The war with the Huns." He looks at the grave face of the young emperor, then turns to Aetius, who stands beside the emperor. With a silent question, "War with Attila, your friend?" The patrice explains, "This case was investigated by Orestes, your son-in-law. Attila asked him to elucidate the murder of the bishop of Sirmium." Troubled, Romulus begins to sweat, his thoughts become chaotic. Julia, war, Patavium. Ah, Villa. He makes a great effort to calm down a little and listen attentively. Aetius, having learned of a serious violation of the Hun laws by Constan, Attila ordered the execution of this secretary, and demanded in his letter to our Augustus Emperor either to reimburse the cost of the vases, or to send him for punishment the banker Sylvanus. The patrice pauses to resume, bows respectfully before Valentinian, then says, "His Clemence replied that Sylvanus acted in accordance with the Roman laws. That vases are sacred and cannot be taken from the church and handed to a lay person." Attila dared then to remark that he cannot take this answer seriously, for, according to him, no one can affirm that the Roman citizens never had sacred objects as military trophies. Our Augustus then announced very generously his agreement to pay Attila the cost of the vases in gold coins. The emperor himself continues, "Now Attila declares that gold does not interest him, that it is a question of principle, either the vases or the banker, or the war." Of the Eastern Empire follows the army of Attila, which is directed towards its capital. But at the end of a few days Scotta announces to Maximin that the Roman embassy should continue its route alone with guides, for Attila marries the young Esco, daughter of Escam, an influential prince shaman. No stranger must attend this ceremony. The road passes through the marshy steppe. Priscus notes in his diary the hospitality of the Huns, who offer them camise and help them cross the rivers. Suddenly the Byzantines see a caravan in the distance, which goes in the same direction as theirs. Some time later, their paths meet and they hear a Latin conversation without accent, for the Huns did not lose their accent, so long was their sojourn in the Roman empires. It is the embassy of the Western Roman Empire led by Count Romulus. Two Roman ambassadors, two counts, exchange information on the purposes of their embassies. It is thus learned that the embassy of Ravenna must regulate affair of the vases of Sirmium. Shocked by Romulus' story, Priscus exclaims, "It's incredible. I do not understand the reasons for this Attila ultimatum." Romulus explains, "Of course, it is a well thought out political gesture. Probably Attila wishes, in order to further strengthen his prestige, to receive simultaneously the two embassies of the two Roman empires. In addition, he shows his subjects how strict the bookkeeping of the trophies is kept and what great importance it gives to the maintenance of the severe discipline in the army." Maximin looks at him attentively. "I know that Orestes, general and minister of Attila, is your son-in-law. I expect you will successfully complete your mission and avoid war through its influence." Priscus exclaims, "He traveled with us from Constantinople to the Danube, and recently, we saw him again with Attila." The deputy of the ambassador of Ravenna, who was silent up to that moment, suddenly asks, "But how is he?" Astonished, Priscus looks at him, "Very good. But why do you ask?" Romulus introduces his deputy, "I present to you the noble Tatullus. He is the father of Orestes." Count Maximin regrets involuntarily that there is not in his embassy any relation of the ministers and generals of Attila. It is also reported that Aetius sends to his friend Attila the noble Constans of Pannonia as counselor and secretary, as well as a Gaulish secretary. Salvian and 2 other officers accompanies the embassy of Ravenna. The 2 embassies arrive together at the capital city. Salvian remarks that 22 years after his first stay in this city, the wooden houses have aged a little. The city itself has not grown, but the palaces are even more magnificent. The villages of the craftsmen and the military camps around the capital are now well laid out. Orestes is very pleased with the arrival of his parents, and his wife Julia radiates happiness. His father, Tatullus, who, after having suffered from the cold on the way, is tired, appreciates much the chimney because few Roman villas are well heated. He is sleeping in a large seat beside the fire with a slight smile of pleasure. Romulus is in a hurry to discuss the matter to be settled with his son-in-law. They sit face to face around a large round table in the middle of the octagonal house in a central space surrounded by 8 columns that support beams coming from the corners of the house. The other beams which connect the neighboring columns are surmounted by decorated panels, which gives Romulus the impression of being surrounded by 8 triumphal arches. He sees only a central part of the high roof that reminds him of the tent of Attila. The carpets are hung from beams in ways to partition the space between the columns and the walls of the vast house in small comfortable rooms whose ceilings form a mezzanine. Julia sits beside her father and listens to the conversation. A servant brings drinks and sweets. "Do you think Attila can declare war against the Western Empire for some vases?" asks the Count. Orestes takes on the serious air. He was very sorry for the murder of the Bishop of Sirmium. This accident spoiled his great joy at the taking of the capital of Pannonia without fighting. The murder was used by the government of Constantinople for anti-Hun propaganda. The execution of Constan was a counter-propaganda action. Now Attila arouses tension with the Western Empire in order to draw attention to this significant fact of its justice. On the other hand, he demonstrates his power. Tatullus sits up in her seat and exclaims, "Is it safe to win the war against 2 Roman empires that he threatens simultaneously?" He's absolutely sure. Attila thinks that now no people on earth is no longer able to resist him. Romulus sighs. "I'm afraid he's right." Julia realizes the gravity of the situation. The war. How awful. She turns to her husband. "My dear, we must stop." To beg Attila. "He is always attentive to your advice. I will speak tomorrow with Keriko." Orestes tries to calm his alarmed parents. In fact, Attila does not want to destroy the Roman empires. He wants to gradually force them to union. But I try to push him to the conquest of Persia. The Huns have found passage through the high mountains of the Caucasus, and the war will not be difficult for their victorious army, which can combine its efforts with the Huns, Hephthalites and Huns, Chionites, who now harass the borders of Persia in Central Asia. They are beginning to speak of the Persians. Maximin notes, "The Romans and Persians have clashed for more than 5 centuries, but the last truce has lasted for almost 20 years." Orestes glances at a superb Persian rug and says, "What is interesting is that the Parthians, who dominated Persia for almost 5 centuries, are descended from the Sakas as a part of the Huns. I think that the Huns can also successfully rule Persia for several centuries."